Ever wonder how people survived in medieval times without Amazon deliveries? Did you know that animals were basically the Amazon Prime of the Middle Ages? Number 10. Bees. Did you know that medieval people were obsessed with sweetness? Imagine a world without sugar packets or high fructose corn syrup. That's exactly what the medieval world was like. Honey was liquid gold in those days, and bees were the tiny winged workers that made it all possible. Medieval beekeeping was serious business. Monasteries especially maintained extensive apiaries, with some religious houses owning hundreds of hives. Bees produced honey, which was the primary sweetener in a world without sugar cane or sugar beets. When you wanted to sweeten your medieval porridge or make a special treat, honey was your go-to ingredient. But bees weren't just about satisfying a sweet tooth. Their wax was absolutely crucial for medieval life. Beeswax candles provided light in the darkness before electricity. And not just any candles, beeswax candles burned cleaner and brighter than the cheaper tallow candles made from animal fat. Churches demanded beeswax candles for religious ceremonies because they produced less smoke and were considered purer. Medieval medicine also leaned heavily on bee products. Honey was used as an antibacterial ointment for wounds, and various ailments were treated with honey-based remedies. Medieval medical texts are filled with references to honey poultices and syrups. The medieval relationship with bees went even deeper. These buzzing insects were often viewed with a kind of mystical reverence. Many beekeepers believed you needed to talk to your bees, informing them of major family events like births, marriages, and deaths. If you failed to tell the bees, they might abandon their hives in protest. Number 9. Falcons and hawks. Ever seen those movies where fancy medieval nobles have birds perched on their arms? Those weren't just fashion accessories. Falconry was all the rage in medieval times, but these birds of prey were way more than just status symbols. Hunting with trained birds of prey was a beloved pastime of medieval nobility. Kings, queens, lords, and ladies all participated in the sport of falconry. Different birds were assigned to different social classes: the peregrine falcon for an earl, the goshawk for a yeoman, and the mighty gerfalcon reserved only for kings. Owning the wrong bird for your social status could actually get you in trouble. But these birds weren't just for show. They were effective hunting partners that helped put food on the table. A well-trained falcon could take down game birds like pheasants, partridges, and ducks, while larger hawks could even tackle hares and rabbits. This wasn't just sport, it was dinner procurement with style. Training a falcon or hawk took immense skill and patience. The birds had to be carefully handled until they became accustomed to human presence, then taught to return to their handler after a hunt. Medieval falconers developed specialized equipment, including hoods to cover the birds' eyes to keep them calm, jesses, thin straps to tether them, and ornate gloves to protect the falconer's hand from those powerful talons. Medieval women were active participants in falconry, one of the few outdoor sports considered appropriate for noble ladies. Paintings and manuscripts often depict women with their hunting birds, demonstrating their skill and status. The relationship between falconer and bird was deeply personal. These creatures lived in their owners' homes, sometimes even in their bedchambers. Number 8. Pigs. Did you know medieval people let their pigs roam free through towns and forests? Imagine walking down a street with pigs casually strolling around like they owned the place. Pigs were the ultimate medieval recycling system. These omnivorous animals would eat practically anything: food scraps, acorns, beechnuts, roots, tubers, and even waste that would otherwise pile up in medieval streets. For peasant families, pigs were like living savings accounts, relatively cheap to keep because they largely fed themselves, yet valuable for the meat they provided. The typical medieval pig looked nothing like today's pink farm animals. They were leaner, hairier, and often black or spotted, resembling wild boars more than modern domesticated pigs. These tough creatures would be allowed to forage in the woods, especially in autumn when acorns and other nuts fell from the trees. This practice, called pannage, was so important that people's right to send their pigs into the forest was enshrined in legal documents. Almost nothing of the medieval pig went to waste. Their meat could be eaten fresh or preserved through salting or smoking. Their fat was rendered into lard for cooking and making candles. Their skin became leather, their bristles were used for brushes, and even their bladders had uses. When dried, they could serve as containers or even as primitive balls for children's games. Pigs feature prominently in medieval art and literature, sometimes as symbols of gluttony and filth, but also as practical animals essential to survival. For most medieval families, slaughtering a pig in late autumn was a major event that would provide food security through the lean winter months. The blood became blood pudding, the intestines became sausage casings, and the head might be made into brawn, a kind of medieval head cheese. Even the bones would be used for tools or boiled for soup. Number 7. Goats. Ever wondered how medieval people survived in places where cows couldn't thrive? The answer might surprise you. It was the humble goat that saved the day in many harsh medieval landscapes. Goats were the ultimate medieval survivors. These hardy animals could thrive in mountainous regions, rocky terrain, and areas where the grass was too poor to support cattle. For people living in challenging environments across medieval Europe, from the Scottish Highlands to the mountains of Spain and Italy, goats provided sustenance when few other domesticated animals could manage. The milk from medieval goats was a daily staple in many households. Goat milk could be drunk fresh or transformed into a variety of cheeses that would keep for months, providing protein through winter when food was scarce. Many regional cheeses that we still enjoy today have their origins in medieval goat herding communities. The milk was also believed to have medicinal properties and was prescribed for various ailments. Medieval craftspeople relied heavily on goats for their trades. Goat skin was transformed into parchment, the writing material that predated paper in Europe. Many of the beautiful illuminated manuscripts that survive from the Middle Ages were written on parchment made from goat skin. The hide with the hair still attached was used for clothing, particularly for warmth in colder regions. Goat hair was also spun and woven into cloth or used to stuff mattresses. Goats' impressive climbing abilities made them useful for clearing land too steep for other animals to graze. They would eat young saplings and brush, effectively managing the landscape and preventing forest encroachment on valuable pasture land. Their relatively small size meant that even families with limited land could keep a goat or two, making them the perfect livestock for the poorest medieval households. Number 6. Oxen. Did medieval farmers have tractors? Of course not. But they did have something almost as powerful: oxen, the heavyweight champions of medieval agriculture. Oxen were the primary draft animals of the medieval world, providing the muscle that powered farming operations across Europe. These castrated male cattle were slower than horses but significantly stronger and cheaper to maintain. While knights and nobles might ride horses into battle, it was the patient ox that truly fed the medieval world. The invention and refinement of the heavy plow was a game changer for medieval agriculture, but this improved tool required serious pulling power, often 8 oxen working together to break through the heavy soils of northern Europe. Villages would sometimes pool their resources, with multiple families sharing a team of oxen for plowing. The annual plowing schedule was so important that it structured the entire agricultural calendar. Oxen were valuable enough to be specified in wills and marriage contracts. A pair of well-trained working oxen could be worth as much as the land they plowed. Training these animals was a specialized skill, usually beginning when they were around 4 years old and continuing for years. They learned to respond to voice commands and to work together as a team, walking in perfect synchronization. Unlike horses, oxen could work steadily for up to 6 hours without rest and could maintain their pulling power on poor quality feed. They were also more resistant to disease than horses and had the added advantage that, at the end of their working lives, they could be fattened and slaughtered for meat. This made them a sound economic investment for medieval farmers who couldn't afford to maintain animals that didn't contribute directly to survival. Number 5. Sheep. Did you know that a fluffy animal changed the course of medieval economics? Sheep were so valuable that stealing one could get you hanged in medieval England. Sheep were absolutely fundamental to the medieval economy, particularly in England, where wool became the backbone of national prosperity. The famous phrase, "the golden fleece," wasn't an exaggeration. Wool exports were so valuable that a sack of wool appears on the Lord Chancellor's ceremonial seat in the House of Lords, known as the wool sack to this day. Medieval sheep looked quite different from modern breeds. They were smaller, hardier, and often had colored wool rather than white. Their wool was generally coarser but was perfectly suited to the durable woolen cloth that kept medieval people warm through harsh winters. Enormous flocks of sheep, sometimes numbering in the thousands, grazed on uplands and downs, tended by shepherds whose profession carried both practical respect and biblical resonance. The annual sheep shearing was a major event in the medieval agricultural calendar, often accompanied by festivities. After shearing, wool would be sorted, cleaned, carded, spun, and woven, providing work for countless people in the medieval textile industry. Monasteries were particularly invested in sheep farming, with Cistercian houses becoming wealthy through their wool production. But sheep weren't just walking wool factories, they also provided milk, which was often made into cheese, particularly in regions like the Pyrenees and parts of Italy where sheep's milk cheese remains traditional. Their meat, mutton, was a common part of the medieval diet, especially for older animals no longer productive for wool. Even sheep droppings had value, being collected as fertilizer for fields. The importance of sheep in medieval culture is reflected in countless artworks, manuscripts, and church carvings. The symbolism of Christ as the Good Shepherd and his flock as the faithful was a powerful image in a society where actual shepherds and their flocks were everyday sights. Sheep farming shaped not just the economy but the very landscape of medieval Europe, creating the pastoral scenes still visible in many regions today. Number 4. Cats. Did medieval people really think cats were in league with the devil? The true story of medieval cats is way more complicated and fascinating than you might expect. Cats had a complex and contradictory status in medieval society. On one hand, they were essential for controlling the rodent population that threatened stored grain and spread disease. A good mouser was highly valued, particularly in granaries, barns, and food storage areas. Monasteries especially appreciated cats for keeping mice from damaging precious manuscripts. Some medieval books even contain paw prints from cats who walked across pages before the ink was dry. Despite their practical value, cats sometimes faced suspicion due to their independent nature and nocturnal habits. By the late medieval period, some religious authorities began associating black cats in particular with witchcraft and demonic forces. However, this view wasn't universal. Many medieval households considered cats to be protective presences and welcomed them as pets and working animals. Medieval cats weren't the pampered indoor kitties of today. They were typically smaller and more wiry than modern breeds, and most earned their keep hunting mice and rats. Some medieval illustrations show cats wearing collars, suggesting that they were valued companions. Other images show cats catching birds or being chased by dogs, reflecting the everyday reality of medieval animal interactions. Cats feature in medieval bestiaries, illustrated animal books, and manuscripts, sometimes portrayed realistically and sometimes with fantastic attributes. One charming tradition involved including cats in the margins of illuminated manuscripts, where they might be shown chasing mice or birds, playing with balls of yarn, or even wearing human clothes in satirical scenes. Despite periods of persecution, cats survived and thrived through the Middle Ages. Their ability to control rodent populations quite literally helped preserve the grain supplies that prevented famine, making them silent heroes of medieval food security. The medieval relationship with cats, combining practicality, affection, and occasional suspicion, laid the groundwork for our modern appreciation of these complex animals. Number 3. Dogs. How could a medieval castle function without security cameras or alarm systems? Enter the medieval dogs, not just a pet, but a critical worker with jobs you'd never imagine. Dogs in the Middle Ages were incredibly diverse in their roles, from the highest royal courts to the humblest peasant cottages. Unlike today, where many dogs are kept purely as companions, medieval dogs almost always had specific jobs. The medieval world classified dogs by their functions rather than breeds as we know them today. Hunting dogs were among the most prestigious, with different types specialized for different prey. Greyhounds chased down fast game like hares, while larger hounds tracked deer and wild boar. Smaller spaniels would flush birds from undergrowth. The ownership of certain hunting dogs was restricted by law to particular social classes, making them living symbols of status and privilege. Guardian dogs protected property, livestock, and people. Massive Mastiff-type dogs guarded castles and estates, while specially trained shepherd dogs helped manage flocks of sheep and herds of cattle. These working dogs were essential economic assets, not merely pets. A good shepherd dog could effectively do the work of several human herders. Even humble peasant households valued dogs for guarding homes, vermin control, and occasionally helping with hunting. These dogs would have been less specialized, performing multiple functions as needed and living on scraps from the family table. Archaeological evidence shows that some of these dogs received careful burials, suggesting emotional bonds between humans and canines transcended mere utility. Dogs appear frequently in medieval art and literature, from loyal companions in romantic tales to symbols in religious imagery. Saint Roch is typically depicted with a dog that brought him bread when he was sick, while Saint Hubert's hunting vision featured a stag with a crucifix between its antlers and his hunting dogs prominently figured in the scene. The loyalty of dogs made them powerful metaphors for faithfulness in a world where that quality was highly prized. Number 2, cattle. Do you know what medieval money sometimes moved? Cows were so valuable in medieval times that they were practically walking bank accounts. Cattle were central to medieval agriculture and economy, valued for much more than just meat and milk. For many medieval farmers, particularly in regions like Ireland, cattle literally functioned as currency. A person's wealth might be measured in how many cows they owned, and payments, dowries, and fines were often specified in terms of cattle rather than coined money. Medieval cows were smaller than modern breeds, often standing no taller than 4 feet at the shoulder. Their colors varied widely. Red, black, white, and dun-colored animals all feature in medieval illustrations. They produced less milk than today's specialized dairy breeds, but that milk was turned into butter and cheese that provided crucial fat and protein in the medieval diet. The care of cattle shaped medieval land management and social organization. Common pastures where villagers could graze their animals were essential to the medieval farming system. The rhythms of cattle care, moving animals to seasonal pastures, bringing them in for winter feeding, calving in spring, structured the agricultural year for many communities. Cattle provided more than food. Their hides became leather for everything from shoes to book bindings. Their horns were crafted into drinking vessels, combs, and buttons. Even their bones and hooves were used for glue, tools, and fertilizer. Oxen, castrated male cattle, pulled plows and carts, providing the muscle power that drove medieval agriculture before mechanization. In medieval art and literature, cattle appear in numerous contexts. The ox and ass warm the infant Jesus in nativity scenes. Cattle raids feature in heroic tales, particularly in Celtic traditions where stealing cattle was a way for warriors to prove their bravery. Saints are sometimes shown with cattle. Saint Bridget of Kildare, for instance, is associated with a white cow with red ears, connecting Christian tradition with earlier pagan cattle goddesses. Number 1, chickens. Did medieval people have alarm clocks? Yes, they did, and they were feathered. Chickens were the timekeepers, pest controllers, and protein providers of medieval households, from the lowliest peasant hut to the grandest castle kitchen. Chickens were among the most ubiquitous animals in medieval daily life, present in virtually every settlement across Europe. These birds were compact protein factories that transformed kitchen scraps, insects, and grains into eggs and meat. For peasant families, chickens represented one of the most accessible sources of animal protein through their eggs, with the occasional slaughtered bird providing a special meal. Medieval chickens looked quite different from today's industrially bred varieties. They were smaller, more colorful, and laid fewer eggs, perhaps 60 to 80 per year rather than the 300 plus of modern hens. Their eggs were valued not just as food but also in medicine, art. Egg whites were used in manuscript illumination and religious symbolism, particularly around Easter. Chicken keeping was often the domain of women in medieval households. The sale of surplus eggs provided one of the few independent income sources available to peasant women, who might use this money to purchase small luxuries or necessities that family farming didn't provide. Medieval court records occasionally show women defending their rights to the proceeds from their chickens, underscoring the economic importance of these birds to household economies. Beyond their practical value, chickens featured prominently in medieval culture. The rooster's crow marked the hours in an age before mechanical clocks were common. Cockfighting was a popular entertainment across all social classes. Chickens appear in medieval marginalia, decorative illustrations in manuscripts, often anthropomorphized in satirical scenes showing the world turned upside down like chickens roasting humans on a spit. Medically, chicken soup was prescribed for various ailments just as our grandmothers might recommend it today. Roosters had particular symbolic significance in Christian contexts as reminders of Peter's denial of Christ before the cock crowed. The medieval mind saw messages and meanings in the common barnyard chicken that modern people might easily overlook. What would your life look like if you had to depend on these animals every single day? Could you imagine modern society functioning without the contributions these creatures made to building our civilization?